Hi everyone, welcome to Talking Mental Health with me, Joe, and today I am joined by Katie. How are you, Katie?
I'm good, thanks. You?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So how's life? How's everything going for you at the moment?
Yeah, it's fine at the minute. So I'm just living with my boyfriend at the minute, but we're in his auntie's house, because she lives in Australia. So she's kindly let us like trial period and see how we're living together. So it's all going great so far.
Nice.
And obviously working as a nursing assistant on a psychiatric ward at the minute. Um, but yeah, things are as okay as they can be.
Yeah, it's a strange time for everyone,
Yeah.
isn't it? I wanted to ask you. Um, Obviously, the main reason I asked you on is just to talk about what life is like in hospitals at the moment, because I guess like we all get like sort of version of it through the media, but what's it actually like for someone like yourself who's working in a hospital while all this stuff's going on?
So from my point of view, I mean, so our kind of unit is completely separate to the physical health kind of wards. So we have our own kind of mental health building. So I can only kind of give perspective on what it's like in terms of mental health and that side of things. I've only kind of had a glimpse of like the physical health wards, but I've not actually been on them because that's not my kind of area. But in terms of mental health, so most of my time working on this ward has been during COVID. So I started last January. So I only had a couple of months non-COVID times. So for me, this is kind of the norm because I've only ever really experienced what it is like during COVID. So it's just, I think the main problem at the minute for us is the pressure on beds. It's just a constant inflow and outflow of people. There's just, it's just chaotic, really.
Yeah,
It was especially difficult during the first kind of lockdown, and everything was kind of new, and we didn't really know what to expect. And it's hard kind of trying to help the patients understand because a lot of them don't really have insight into COVID, or like they don't really understand the isolation rules and what's going on, and that can cause more distress and upset. Like at the start, well, there's been a brief period where some patients who have a leave off the unit and are allowed to go out in the community, that was just prevented, and that can really impact someone's recovery because if they're kind of getting closer to feeling a lot better, and then all of a sudden like their kind of contact with the outside world is stopped and they're just kind of remaining in hospital, it just really causes like a relapse in the mental state. And even like simple things like seeing their families, like they weren't allowed to do that at some stages. um, and so when they first get admitted into hospital, they have a COVID swab and they have to isolate until we get them results back. But it's hard for us to manage because some people don't understand why they're isolating. They don't really know because of their mental state. They don't understand, they can't comprehend the COVID situation. So if they feel like we're just kind of making them stay in the room or making them isolate, and they don't have any understanding of why that's happening. So on their part and our part, it's really hard to see and quite difficult to deal with because we're trying to protect everyone else on the unit, but also trying to look after this individual and their mental state as well. So it is really, really difficult at the minute. But it's just something we have to kind of take on and like take on full force and just see what we can deal with as and when it
yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I guess it's hard for you guys because that is part of your job, but there's also like added pressure now as well with COVID and stuff. So are people like on the ward now? Were they kind of there when you started last year, or have you seen like an increase in numbers since the first lockdown?
Um, it depends on the individual, but there is like there's constantly new patients, and there's constantly people presenting with mental health difficulties relating directly to COVID, like experiencing psychosis and just like a complete break from reality because they've experienced so much stress and they've undergone so much that they've just kind of shut down, and they just don't know what to experience and how to experience it anymore. There's a lot of people who are preoccupied with their physical health, have kind of anxieties around that, and have come in with that. It's just such a wide variety of presentations that have been affected because of COVID, and it's just the how widespread it is. It's just unbelievable how it can affect an individual. Like some people who have experienced redundancy or like lost their job or something, and how COVID has impacted that and then further impacted the mental state. So there is always new people coming into hospital for their mental health.
Is that, and you mentioned there about like people, being made redundant or maybe living alone. Is that having like, are you seeing people come to the hospital that have never had mental health problems before, and this lockdown and this sort of last 10 to 11 months has kind of just started a cycle for them?
Yeah, definitely. That a lot of people who aren't known to mental health services, and this is their first admission into hospital, there's so many people who are presenting like that, and it's such a scary situation for them because they've never, like, they don't really have much understanding of what's going on. They don't really have insight into mental health, and all of a sudden they're just experiencing this completely new experience, and they're really struggling with it. So that is a really hard aspect of it as well, because it's trying to help them understand what they're going through and trying to help them understand the impact of the social pressures and COVID on what they're experiencing.
Yeah, I can imagine it. Like my dad lives alone, and he was doing okay for probably about the first couple of months, and then all of a sudden he was like really struggling because he was on his own. He was doing the same sort of walk every day. He was looking at the same four walls, and I think he got to a point where he just needed a change of scenery and he needed something else. And yeah, I can completely see how anybody can be struggling at the moment. What's it like for you guys, like as staff? You're going in there to work, but you're also helping people through this difficult time, but that you're experiencing as well.
Yeah, it is really difficult in terms of like personal experience, because we're experiencing all this kind of like horrible emotions with lockdown and being bored of the same kind of routine, but then we're also going into hospital and helping people who are struggling as well. So like we don't mean to, but we kind of take on their burden as well, and it's just kind of experiencing all these negative emotions at once and trying to effectively manage them and reflect and let go of them. And it is quite difficult because we do have support in work, but we don't it's not it's not the best. And like I've been struggling quite a lot recently because last year I had some loss in my family. So my cousin and their godmother died, and then so I kind of needed some support from work, but there's still all the pressures of referrals, and I'm still on the waiting list for that, so we don't really get much support as we'd like to. And I think that is just because of funding, and like it's just how it is basically, and it's not how it should be, but that's just how it is for us at the minute.
Is it hard to kind of detach yourself from being in work and hearing the things that people are struggling with, and then just going home? Do you have a way you can switch off, or is it hard to do?
Yeah, because I feel like I'm such an emotional person anyway, so like if someone kind of explains what they're going through, I really take it on board and like take such an empathetic view and kind of just experiencing what they're experiencing, which is positive for kind of building relationships with people. But then it does really affect you. Like you just kind of have to get in the mindset of trying to separate yourself from it. And when you come home, just completely trying to switch off from it. I mean, it does help having like, because my work colleagues, we are a really supportive team, and having that supportive team is beneficial in helping each other kind of offload your problems on each other. But I think everyone's going to struggle like separating themselves when they get home, but I think it's just important trying to take time for yourself and making sure you're actually looking after yourself as well. And that's one of the reasons why I reduced my hours recently and became part-time, because I just wasn't taking any time for myself. I was working way too much and I just felt so burnt out from it all. So I just thought I just need to take some time for myself and just have a break from work and only work part-time.
Yeah, and have you noticed a difference yet, or is it not quite there yet since you've changed the hours?
Um, I mean, it's only been like a week or two that I've just changed my hours, and I don't know, I feel like I've got all this spare time. I'm not really doing anything with it, but I don't know, it is, I do feel a lot more relaxed, and I feel like people shouldn't be afraid to kind of take that break and reduce the hours if they can do and if they can afford to, because it's important to look after yourself, and you can't provide if your kind of bucket is empty. Like you can't keep on giving and not take anything back for yourself. So I think it's definitely it's worthwhile, and I'm glad that I have done it.
Yeah, such a wise move, like to realize that you are struggling and that you needed to take that step back so you could, like you said, refill your tank and then give the best of yourself when you do go into work. Because I think that's something that people do very easily is burn out, but they don't realize why they're burning out because they're just constantly
Yeah.
working, working, working. Is that common in your sort of profession that people, do burn out because they are taking on so much of other people's stuff?
Yeah, definitely. And over COVID as well, because I don't know, part of you kind of feels bad for being like calling in sick, and then you're like, wait a minute, I shouldn't feel bad that I'm experiencing these difficulties and I need a break. Like, you need to kind of take some time for yourself. And over COVID, there have been a lot more sicknesses, and that might be related to COVID or general stress. And I know a lot of like myself and my colleagues just have had to take some time out and just have some time to themselves, because it is such a stressful job. And I can imagine on the physical health side as well, like that people, nurses, especially people looking after COVID patients, really do need to take some time for themselves.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think any profession you work in, you have to take time for yourself. But I guess for people like you guys, you're looking after yourself while looking after others as well. And I think that's why it's such
Yeah,
an important job that people in the NHS and other care providers do, because yeah, you're going home to take care of yourself and your family or your partner or whoever, but then you go into work and you're taking care of everybody else. And it must be really difficult to find that time where you can just step back and say, right, I'm not taking care of anybody today. I'm just going to take care of myself because I need it for me, whatever it may be.
yeah, and I think I'm quite fortunate in that I don't really have anyone else, like anyone dependent on me that I need to look after. Whereas there's a lot of people in work, like mothers, fathers, like people who actually have dependents, some people they actually need to provide care for, or like homeschool. So I
Mm.
think that added pressure of that as well must be really difficult for people to cope with. Whereas I actually just get time just for myself, whereas I think their time for themselves must be really reduced.
Yeah. And you said before you're a very empathetic person. Is that kind of one of the reasons that you got into this line of work? Because, or is that something you knew you always wanted to do when you were younger?
So my kind of path is like towards a psychology route. So in this hospital setting I'm in at the minute, it's it's very medicalized. So like the treatment is very medication and like orientated around medication, which I find quite disappointing as a psychology graduate, because as soon as I started, I thought, oh, there's going to be like a psychology team, like I'm going to get involved with that. I was getting really excited to get involved with that. And then all of a sudden, when I got there, it was like, oh, we don't have funding for a psychology team. Like, Trafford is an affluent area. And I was just like, oh, right, okay. So what happens? And it's just like, it's just medication and like just making sure I'm monitoring that, and like we can refer to psychological teams and have input from the occupational therapists and their teams, but psychology is kind of an external thing on this unit. So, I mean, that I've stayed in this job because it's given me such great experience of working with individuals enduring mental distress. But at the same time, like I'm just so keen to kind of support people in a psychological way and kind of get that other experience. And like loads of the hospitals, like it's unfortunate that in the one I'm at, like all the other ones seem to have psychology teams. So it is unfortunate that I kind of landed there. But at the same time, I don't think I'd change it because I've I've experienced the lack of psychology, and that's kind of given me more inspiration and more motivation to kind of help people from a psychologically informed like approach. And like my next step will definitely be involved in like therapeutically like interventions and like stuff that way, and that more psychology based.
So where you are now, it's more let's focus on giving them medicine to heal and recover rather than what you would have trained in terms of like do some interventions and do some workshops and like I don't know CBT and stuff like that to try and support people through in a more organic way, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think some of the people who come into our hospital as well like find that particularly difficult because a lot of them a lot of them do have insight into psychologically informed approaches, so they kind of come into the ward and they expect to like have therapies and like get involved in interventions, and we do provide like some like basic workshop things, and like I provide basic CBT help and self-help booklets, but it's nowhere near what can be done on wards that have a natural psychology team. And I think that's one area that does let us down because it's so important. Like psychology is involved in everything, and it's important to kind of involve that in the treatment of someone who's enduring distress.
So is your
But like
sorry, go ahead.
but like I said, I wouldn't change it. Like I have learned so much from this role, and just experiencing other people's experiences and seeing what they're going through has been really beneficial to kind of my understanding and insight into mental health as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, has it opened up your eyes a little bit more to the other side of people's struggles? Because I guess most of your training was psychologically focused. Has this given you another window into the world of what it
Yeah,
means?
yeah, definitely. Because like in at university, there was always this debate where it was like, should we kind of have a sole focus on medication, or should we bring in both medication and psychological treatment? And I was always a bit like, not against medication, but there's only so much medication can do, and like psychology is more of a deep rooted kind of treatment that helps people on a more like holistic level and trying to get to the root of the cause. But I still believe that, but then experiencing what I have in work, I've seen such benefit from medication, and someone who presents so psychotic and like just so chaotic and bizarre in behavior, and just getting back on track with the medication and being more concordant with the treatment has just completely changed the presentation. They're just a completely different person. So I've definitely seen the benefits of medication completely, but I still do believe that to kind of, I mean, it's I suppose it's based on like a personal individual level, but I think psychology and psychological interventions do have a lot more benefit.
Mm. I was just thinking while you were saying that there about, people who present with sort of mental health problems, and we were saying earlier about how, they may have never been on the radar of a mental health service. From a psychological point of view, like if somebody does reach a point, let's say they've been made redundant in the last 12 months and it really affects them, could there be like underlying psychological issues from earlier in life that are then kind of manifest, or not manifesting is the wrong word, but are kind of coming to the surface because they've lost their job. So is that like a trigger, or is it very dependent on the person and the circumstances that they're going through?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on like a personal level and what the person has experienced. I mean, anything could be a trigger for someone. And I think those who have experienced trauma earlier on in their childhood are more likely to perceive triggers as more stressful and perceive them as more salient in causing some distress. So someone who's experienced like a lot of childhood trauma and experiencing awful things could perceive something really stressful, but another person could experience the same thing and not really perceive it that stressful. So I think it is just dependent on the individual, but trauma and childhood experiences does has a really important role in how we kind of perceive and see threats and how important they are.
Yeah, and you know, you and I met through NCS, so we've done a lot of work with young people together as well as separately.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about like childhood trauma, like am I right in thinking like your earliest years, like you from birth to like 6, are like the most important years of your childhood or something in terms of like psychological, like what you see and what you hear and how you perceive things? Is that like, am I right in thinking that then that stays with you for
Yeah.
the rest of your life or helps how you perceive things?
Yeah, and especially relationship with your caregiver as well, like that's really important in kind of mapping out your future relationships with individuals and how you perceive relationships with individuals and how you perceive the future and stuff like that. So yeah, it it all kind of comes down to your experience as a child and then core kind of first few years.
So what is it about the caregiver? Is it just like if you get good care, then you kind of perceive that through? Can you just explain that a little bit further? Because I'm
So
interested in
it's
that.
so it's more like your attachment with your caregiver. So if you have a secure attachment with them, then you'll trust other people in the future, and you're more likely to have like stable relationships in the future. Whereas if your attachment is insecure and anxiety provoking, then that kind of reduces your trust in individuals and kind of maps out the kind of blueprints into like faulty relationships almost. Like it makes you have a faulty perception of people and just very untrusting and very anxious. So it's more attachment styles.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of attachment styles before and stuff like that. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit because you've done way more about, you know, learning about this than I have. So if somebody was watching this and they were struggling with relationships and they couldn't figure out why, could that potentially go all the way back to childhood and their relationship with their caregiver?
Yeah, I mean, it is one kind of causal factor that you could look into, but I wouldn't then think, oh no, I must have a really bad relationship with my mum if I have bad relationships with everyone else. I mean, it's just dependent on other experiences. I think taking a psychologically informed approach, you need to make sure you're holistic and taking into other factors into account, and not just having one thing that has a causal effect and taking into account loads of different factors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking very generally and very broadly there, and I know every
Yeah,
individual is slightly different, but it's just interesting because I am quite interested in psychology, and obviously, like I do a lot of work with young people, so I'm trying to learn more and more about the teenage brain and how certain traumas affect different people, etc., etc. And I'm currently doing like a mental health first aid course, and I'm learning a lot about this, and I find it really interesting. And the training is very deep, but it's very knowledgeable, and I'm taking a lot from it. In terms of your training, and I assume you've done a degree in psychology, and then if you had to do more on top of that to get into the position you're in now.
so I did undergraduate degree, which is 3 years, and then I did my master's degree, which is another year on top. And then I just went straight into this job from there, really. I mean, so eventually I went to do the DClin, which is like a postgraduate degree in clinical psychology. And at the end of it, you become a doctor in clinical psychology. But to get there, you need like tons of experience. So this is why I kind of chose this job for now, to gain this experience and kind of direct experience with people experiencing mental distress. But from here, I'd probably go into assistant psychologist post, which people tend to do, or like a research assistant post to kind of get more research experience. So it depends on what people have experience in. A lot of people go into volunteering as well, through like helplines. Um, but it just depends. I mean, by the end of it, hopefully, is I get to the point where I can apply for the postgraduate training.
And how much experience are you talking in that window that you need? Do you know?
It depends really. I mean, it's really competitive. So to get onto it, I don't know how, I think it's like 1 in 10 people
Oh,
get a
wow.
place on training. And people come from like all aspects. Like people have PhDs applying for it. People have like a couple of years, people only have 1 year. I think it is kind of luck, but then I think it just depends how you present yourself and how you kind of describe your experiences and the transferable skills that you kind of pick from each experience and how you present them, what kind of gets you onto the training. But I wouldn't be applying for it until at least like 2 years.
Oh, wow. So it is like a very long process, and it's not just a case of do your degree,
Yeah,
do your masters, and then it's like right straight into it. You have to have that work experience and that experience of different fields as well.
yeah. Because I think by the time you get onto the training, they expect you to have like a underlying kind of knowledge and experiences that make you applicable to go into trainee clinical psychologist roles, because you just do a lot of placements. Like there is some form of education around it, but a lot of it is just different placements with different mental health populations. So you're expected to kind of already know what to do before you get onto the postgraduate really.
So it's really competitive then for those jobs and to help people.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Was it easy to get the job that you're in? Because I imagine if that level is quite competitive, the level that you're at now must have been fairly competitive just to get into the position.
I mean, for kind of support worker roles and like what I am, a nursing assistant, it's not too competitive, but I was searching for quite a while to land this one. Um, but I think it was more because I wanted an NHS based one, because that gives you more benefit and more kind of points when you come to apply for the postgraduate. Um, but in terms of like the next step, so the next role I would want is an assistant psychologist role, and they're really competitive. So every time I see one on NHS jobs or being advertised, I'm like, quick, apply really quickly, because within seconds, like they get full capacity of applicants and they just go. So it's just making sure you're on the ball. And that's another thing with part-time. I have more time to kind of keep my eye out on roles that are available and quickly apply for them, because before then roles would come up in work and I'd be trying to apply on my phone on my break and they'd just go straight away. So yeah, they
Mm,
are really competitive.
yeah. Well, I suppose that's a good thing though, right? Because then they're not just letting anybody in. You have to be, committed to the course
Yeah,
degree and have your experience,
yeah.
etc.
I think, and the main thing, like taking this career route as well, I think the main thing people are looking for is like your passion and enthusiasm, and making sure you kind of portray that in your interviews and stuff. Because I've had a couple of interviews, and like I get really, really nervous for interviews. I just, I'm just a mess. And I think it made me, one of the interviews I had for an assistant psychologist role was just after my cousin passed away. So I just really wasn't ready for it and really wasn't in the right headspace. But I went anyway just to kind of give myself a go of it. And afterwards, she was like, "You interviewed great, but you just didn't really show like your passion and enthusiasm as well. I know you have it, but you just didn't kind of get it out of you." And I was just
Mm.
like, yeah, probably not, because I was in a really bad headspace, but thank you.
Oh, it must be so frustrating when you're like, well, I mean, it is frustrating when you go for an interview and you know you've done really well and they tell you you've done really well. And then it's like, but, and your whole body just, oh,
Yeah. And the thing with them interviews as well, like a lot of people, it comes down to being like, one of the interviews as well, she was like, oh, you were in the top two, but the other person had more experience. And it's just like, how am I meant to get more experience if people won't let me get the job in the first place?
yeah, yeah. I think that's a common theme for a lot of people, isn't it? Like, I was reading something the other day about people coming out of university and looking for jobs, and it's like you need 5 years experience. And it's like, well, how am I supposed to have it? I've just come out of uni. I'm 20, 21, 22. I can't be working full time and doing uni full time. So, yeah, I can imagine that's a lot of frustration for a lot of people. You
Yeah, and then
sorry, no, go on.
I was just gonna say, and then comparing yourself to your friends who have like done other degrees where you can literally just come out of uni and land yourself like a 40 grand job,
Mm.
and I'm here like really struggling to get like a 19 grand salary job, and it's just like
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the system's kind of broken though as well, isn't it? Because the work you're doing is so important, and it's needed not just in Trafford, like throughout the country. And like you said, people are coming out of uni and really struggling to find a job in a position where it's really important and it's really needed. And you've put yourself through a lot of time and effort to get just to that point where you finished a degree or the masters. And then there's other degrees where people are, like you said, coming out of a degree and walking into a job that's not as important as what you guys are doing, but there's more opportunities available to them.
yeah, and like the job I'm doing at the minute, like you don't need a degree for it. So a lot of people kind of say to me, "Oh, well, I didn't realize you've got a degree," and I'm just like, "Yeah, you know."
Yeah, not to knock
But
the job, but you're almost like too smart to be in the position that you're in, or you're overqualified, I guess would be the sort of
yeah,
technical term for it.
yeah.
That must be frustrating though for someone like you. Like you're in a position where you want to be helping people and you are helping people. Do people kind of look at you and think, she shouldn't really be here because she is too qualified for this position? Do you ever get that feeling, or do you not come across it?
Um, I don't know. Like, there's been a lot of times where I've kind of offered to do like psychological interventions or like formulations or things like more psychology related, and I've been told no, I can't do them because there's not like a clinical psychologist there to supervise me, so I
Mm.
wouldn't be able to do it. So it is difficult, and I feel like people know in work that I want to try my best to kind of push any psychology that I can, but I don't know. It is really hard. I think they must think, God, she shouldn't be here, but I don't know.
Might be time to go private and do your own thing. Is that something you
Yeah.
that's something you could do in your position? Like not in the job you're in, but like where you are, could you start your own practice?
Once you kind of qualify and do the postgraduate training, and that's always something where I've been like, if I win the lottery, I'm gonna
Hmm.
open my own practice and I'm gonna have my own like psychological therapy practice,
Hmm.
but I don't know.
Yeah, something you can always think about in the future, I guess, if you
Maybe.
but you started a page on Instagram as well, didn't you? Which I was
Yeah.
intrigued by, and I think that's kind of where I mean, after speaking with Lisa, but also from seeing that and what you're posting, I think it's really good. Just tell me a bit about that because I really like it.
So I've always kind of wanted to do it, but I've always been scared if in case people thought, oh, like I don't know, I'm just always worried about what people will think of me. I think that's one of my bad kind of qualities. And it's always kind of put me off doing stuff like that because I've been worried like what will happen because of it, or if I get hate or something. I don't know. But I just kind of thought like I have my degree and have all this knowledge, and I may as well put some of it to use, as well as documenting my own journey into clinical psychology, as it might help people in the future who do want to go down it. And also, it helps you connect with a lot of other people experiencing the same thing. So, like when you do get setbacks or when you don't get that particular job that you want, you can like there's a lot of other people in that community to give you support for it. And I don't know, you feel kind of less alone in the journey to clinical psychology because you can just physically see other people going through what you're going through. So it has been really good to connect with other people, and I have connected with a lot more people than I would off my normal Instagram. And it gives kind of a space just to kind of focus on like positivity and like focus on psychology, because my other Instagram, I do follow some psychology accounts, but a lot of it is just pictures of my friends or pictures of random people or pictures of food. And this just gives me something to solely have a positive focus, and like it kind of gives me like drive each day when I click onto it. Like if I'm having a bad day and I'm like, oh, I'm never going to get onto the training, or like I'm never going to be a good psychologist or something, or if you have doubts about yourself, it kind of gives me something to kind of think, no, like this is something that I love doing, and this is something that I'm determined to kind of get on to. So I don't know, it's just given me kind of a positive space really to kind of express my own journey.
Yeah, and I think it's cool. Like I like some of the stuff you're posting because it's also good for people that are viewing the content that you're putting out there, and it's kind of almost a supportive page to say, look, everybody struggles, or this is what people are going through, and you're not the only one. And I think, like you said, it's nice that people can connect over that, even if it's something that they're both struggling with. They can connect. The struggle will bring them together.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I really like it. And is that something that you just, you're not going to, I don't know, what's your plan with that page? Is it just to keep posting stuff and keep supporting other people, but
Yeah,
also give
like I
yourself a
think
space?
it's more, it is just to kind of document my my career really, and like what I'm going through. And I think I'm working on a post at the minute related to OCD and like people's misconceptions of that, and just to kind of, I think in an indirect way, break down the stigma of mental health as well, and like help educate people on just kind of basic mental health and like basic theories around it and psychological understanding of it. And yeah, eventually when I'm a big psychologist, I'll post on it.
Yeah, I think that's important though, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there, especially with social media, about particular areas of mental health that people think, oh no, that must be true and that has to be a fact and that's definite. And then you do some training, you're like, oh, actually, that's not true at all. Somebody's just made that up and posted it for the sake of getting some likes and stuff. So, yeah, I think from my point of view as a non-psychologist or trained psychologist, it's good to see things that people like yourself are posting, because then you can separate the facts from the nonsense. And I think that's what people need more than ever now, is to know what are the actual facts around mental health, not just what is somebody's opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think educating people as well about what they're going through really does play a part in their recovery as well, because they help understand why they're actually experiencing some of the things that they're going through. Like I know my work on the wards, like a lot of people who are experiencing depression, especially at such a young age, they don't actually understand any of the underlying factors in depression or low mood, and that's more distressing to them because they're in such a low place and we don't understand why. So they might have not experienced anything that has put them at a higher risk of developing or experiencing depression. It might just be pure biological influences and the lack of certain neurotransmitters in the brain that has caused them to develop a low mood. And that's why medication can play such a key part, because it helps treat the biological influences on depression. So helping individuals understand that helps them feel like they're not fleeing and they're not strange or weird or anything for experiencing what they're experiencing.
Mhm. So is there an element of nature in that as well? Because you mentioned there like people are born and they're not really sure. So can people like be born with something in their brain that doesn't really materialize or show itself until like later on in their life?
I don't know in terms of, I guess in terms of lifespan, but yeah. So um, for biological causes of mental illness, most of them are lack of certain chemicals in the brain, and I suppose that is resulting from birth. Um, but so yeah, it is just one of them things, and that's why medication helps, because it increases the amount of that certain chemical in the brain and reduces the psychological symptoms that they're experiencing. But there's also other biological influences. So like if people have certain family histories and other people in the family have experienced depression or psychosis, they're more likely to. And there's certain kind of illnesses that like mimic and um, cause the development of certain psychological symptoms as well.
That's interesting, because we always have these conversations about like nature versus nurture and your environment versus your birth and etc. etc. So I guess there is kind of a mix of, it's not just about how you brought up and who you brought up by, but it's also there can be sort of physiological elements in there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to read up more on that because I am interested in psychology. And I think it's something that I've learned more and more over time, is that I am passionate about learning how people think and what makes people do certain things and when and why, etc. So yeah, that's definitely something I want to read up on more. Well, thank you. I'm gonna stop there only because it's getting a bit dark in here and I'm like losing my light and I'm like, look, I can't barely see myself. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I feel like I want to do this again because I've got a lot more questions that I feel like would come up that I can't think of right now. So maybe we'll do another one in the future.
Yeah, no worries, that's fine.
Remind me, what's the Instagram if anyone sees this and they want to follow the psychological one?
It's called So Psyched. So like SOO and then Psyched.
Cool. Yeah, I recommend it. It's a very good page to follow. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank
Hope you
you.
enjoy your time off, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you. See you
Thanks,
later,
Kate. See
Joe.
you later.
Bye.